The media desperately wants to save Hogwarts Legacy 2 from making mistakes that lead to another horrible boycott. What swell journalists? Where would our industry be if not for these angels looking out for us? What a loaded dung heap of nonsensical emotional blackmail disguised as altruism. We need to break this down piece by vomit-coated piece because it is back-to-back deceptions that truly show how these addled wordsmiths corrupt dialogues. So let's start with problem number 2. The concept that they did something to deserve their so-called boycott. To save time going forward, the word boycott will be replaced with what it actually was, a harassment campaign. Hogwarts Legacy did nothing wrong to begin with. For a massive studio, they showed grace and restraint on an unparalleled level. They dotted their I's, crossed their T's, their devs stayed silent throughout the massive beating they took from activist extremists for months. A harassment campaign that included looking up employee personal information, doxing for months prior, and after game launch, an activist-led inundation of threats and vitriol online. Very well documented by very many people. This violent and prolonged attack on both game studio and its audience was unprecedented. Going back to the media accusation though, the implication that they did something wrong under the guise of giving advice on how to fix it for the sequel, let's push back on that. There was nothing the studio could have done to avoid the activist-led harassment campaign, because the studio did nothing to cause it. This was purely based on something that Hogwarts Legacy 2 will also be guilty of. Being a game based on books written by a woman who was obedient to 99 doctrines of the cult, but dared to be an uppity bitch about opinion number 100. What did happen is activists through their mob tactics got someone fired from the studio for mild social media comments years ago, your basic cancel culture, and even someone from another company altogether unrelated over daring to post that they had interest in playing the wizard game. Not to stop there, they started harassing influencers. The activists created a kill list of anyone who played the game. Members of the game's media partook in this witch hunt and played defense as well as inquisitor, looking for any reason to collect a scalp. Lovely people. Thankfully, there's a thing called karma, and about 90% of the game's media has been laid off since. Their entire industry is gone. I won't say good riddance, that would be poor manners. Instead, let's say great riddance. Many influencers were blindsided by these lunatics, most notably VTubers with largely cozy, positive communities around them. For them, playing a video game is just something they do constantly to entertain their audiences. It would never cross their minds that there would be a problem with it. So they were caught completely off guard, suddenly hounded by weeks of harassment and the worst accusations and insults, possible threats of all sorts of evil actions, doxing to show intent and ability to carry through with those threats. In summary, this game's media revisionist misses the point at the very thesis. Hogwarts Legacy Studio did nothing to cause the backlash to begin with, and as such, there is nothing they can do for Hogwarts Legacy 2 to avoid another journalist-backed harassment campaign. But perhaps there is something even more important than the meat of their accusation, and that's the results. Let's forget for a moment whether they did or didn't and can or can't cause this so-called scenario, this so-called backlash, this boycott. Why would they avoid this situation even if they could? Look, here's the difference between a customer boycott and a so-called activist boycott. Oh right, we're calling it a harassment campaign. Cancel culture. When customers boycott, you get stuff like Concord, Avowed, Veilguard. These games fail to hit targets, result in layoffs, studios shut down because the audience for their games make a decision to not support the game. An activist boycott, on the other hand, and using that term very incorrectly since these people have never caused a successful boycott in their lives, because that is not how they operate. When they do a so-called boycott, what is really involving is going to social media bosses to get accounts silenced, going to Patreon or Kickstarter bosses to get projects funding terminated, going to Visa and MasterCard bosses to get them to pressure Steam to not sell the games to begin with, going to HR and just threatening what you're gonna do to them if they don't give you what you want. Thanks, SBI, for letting us know how you operate. Cancel culture and activist power is purely corporate and government power. That's why they always say their goal is to speak power to truth. It's not about influencing minds or inspiring people to do better. It's about using blackmail, threats, violence, authority to stop games from being sold to begin with. That is how their boycott works. That is the only way an activist boycott works. By using power to limit the existence of things they want to fail. It's not about getting people not to buy something. It's about getting something to not be able to be sold in the first place. Because the moment something they hate is made and on the market, it's too late. Their biggest boycott campaigns in the past few years were Stellar Blade, which was a AA game that sold AAA level of units, millions of copies, Black Myth Wukong, which sold 20 million copies in weeks, and of course, Hogwarts Legacy. Hogwarts Legacy shouldn't care about trying to avoid a boycott, because activists threw everything at Hogwarts Legacy. Every tactic, harassed and bullied people, put people's lives in danger with doxing and literal kill lists if they dared to stream the game. It sold 35 million copies. Journalist advice is useless. Trying to influence the decisions of one of the best-selling games of the last decade, a game they openly hope fails, is peak journalism. AAA Western corporations fall apart listening to consultants whisper the worst possible advice, and they think they can go to a game they openly hate and tried to boycott that sold 35 million copies and tell them how to do better? Here's the counterpoint, not just to Hogwarts Legacy 2, but to every single games developer, indie to AAA. Ignore the advice of journalists. Cut them out, stop giving them review copies. Their feedback is worse than worthless. Nobody trusts their judgment. Stop paying for consultants. They don't know what they're talking about. They're ignorant on the topics they're supposed to consult on. They're supposed to be experts on. Assassin's Creed Shadows was so proud of all the money and people they spent on consulting. What was the result? Almost everything wrong about Japan, insulting their religion, their culture, putting things in the game from the wrong era or even from other Asian cultures. Because to Ubisoft, every Asian looks the same. Studios, gut your HR, DEI, other middle management departments. If they do not put their hands on a game design tool, fire them immediately. You can make games with developers and relevant creative staff only. If every AAA studio cut their staff from thousands down to hundreds, instant budgets cut in half. Games made faster, fewer bugs and issues, focused direction, higher quality. Claire Obscure 33 is the best game to come out of Ubisoft? Just 33 people, without the shackles of Ubisoft corporate culture and upper management. If Hogwarts Legacy 2 wants to avoid the same boycotts its predecessors faced, the sequel cannot take the same approach that the original did. And apparently I'm the clown here. The media invents these stories. Every part of this is just wrong. The premise, the accusation, the results, but most of all the threat. Why exactly would Hogwarts Legacy 2 want to avoid the biggest Streisand effect in gaming history? The worst part is, AAA studios at one point actually looked at the major success they were getting, the stranglehold they had over the fastest growing entertainment industry in the world, and they did turn to these activist lunatics in the 2010s and let them completely ruin everything they had built over decades. Guarantee, right now, there's activists in this very studio demanding subservience to the consultant mafia, just looking for that one spineless executive that just begs to bow down. That's why we need to talk about this and keep talking about this, because these companies cannot help but want to fail. They can see very clearly their values over the last decade have ruined the industry, caused massive layoffs, destroyed multiple studios and franchises. They have found consistent, overwhelming failure. Yet they seem to be driven like lemmings, howling with joy as they toss themselves from the cliffs of relevancy. Complacency got us the games industry we currently have beset on all sides and within by saboteurs and villains. And we can all see journalists pulling this for the nonsense it is. But the games industry seems dead set on not learning lessons, so we gotta keep teaching this old man right from wrong. So like, comment, and subscribe. And to the Twitter freaks that are still coping and seething over this game, I apologize for absolutely nothing.